My name's Chris Larsen. I've been a research engineer with Blue Coat, now Symantec, for about 12 years. Spend about half my time looking for threats in a beautiful river of log traffic from around the world, and then the other half writing software to detect the bad guys' shenanigans going on there. And the purpose of this talk is to highlight some stuff that's going on in various top-level domains, and then to show you some sneaky ways you can exploit that if you're a red team inclined person, or something to warn your users about if you're a blue team person. But what I want you to take away from this is the thought process that is the heart of hacking, where you notice something, something about it catches your interest. You say, that's interesting. I wonder what would happen if. And so then you start playing around, and if you follow a logical thought process from that point, you end up with something pretty cool. Hopefully you'll agree at the end of this. If we get to the end and you don't think it's pretty cool, then it'll be kind of sad. So the agenda is simple. We're going to talk about the TLD explosion, set the background for what's going on, talk about some of the current rampant abuse that's happening, most of which is not interesting for this crowd, and then move on to the third phase, which is talking about some, I was going to say theoretical abuse, but we have seen it happen now in the real world, so some advanced abuse that would be of interest to this crowd, and then a couple of slides to take back to your organization. So this all started with a problem that I call all the good domains are taken. And so if you or any of your friends have done a startup, there's a ritual that you follow where one night, fairly early in the life of your new company, you get a bunch of pizza and a beverage of your choice, and you sit around. One person is at the keyboard, and everybody else is brainstorming, and you come up with names for your company. And the guy at the keyboard, like, nope, that's taken. All right, how about, nope, that's taken. And you follow this for about half an hour to an hour, and eventually you realize that all the good domains are taken, and your choice comes down to some really long descriptive name about mycompany.com, which is accurate, but no one's going to like, or you have to go pay a domain squatter, some sum of money, $1,000, $10,000, whatever, to get the domain that he's been holding for this moment, right? So people recognized this a long time ago, and ICANN and IANA wanted to foster choice and competition. In other words, one of the goals was to make it impossible for the domain squatters of the world to literally register all of the good domain names. And they also wanted to make some money, okay? So, and I say that because the fee to get into a new domain space is a minimum of $186,000. That's just to get in. To actually get the license and run a top-level domain, there's more on top of that. It's more like a $250,000 investment, and that's not counting any of your technical people and your infrastructure, because that's part of the process, is you have to show that you have enough of that to run a TLD. So we've seen a bunch of new TLDs, and then these include some GTLDs, or generic or global top-level domains like .xyz or .top or .accountant. There are international names like .maison, .football. As TLDs, like those examples, one is the Russian Federation, RF in Cyrillic, and the other is .hanguk in Korean. There are geographic TLDs, there's .Tokyo, .London. There are a lot of major cities in the world that now have a .city name TLD, so that local businesses, small restaurants and tourist things, can have a nice site, and then people can know that if I'm going to go to anything on .Tokyo has some kind of background vetting, so it really is a cool place to visit. And there's also a handful of global brands that have decided to buy a top-level domain for their business, so they can create all sorts of interesting domains on that, and those will be publicly accessible on the internet. We lost the slides. It wasn't my fault. I'm not even doing a demo. Come on. Demo gods are not supposed to hate slides. There we go. All right. So if you go back to when I started on the web, there were basically a handful. I didn't even know about .arpa, but I'd run into com, edu, gov, mil, net, org. .int. Anybody seen a .int domain name? There are not many. You have to be the United Nations or or UNESCO or somebody like that. Like I can't go get chrislarsen.int because I am not a .int. I'm not an international organization, nor do I want to be. And then we had these two-letter country codes, and the internet stayed that way for the first decade or so. And then that early, like we're talking late 90s, the good domain names were already taken. Okay, it was hard to find a reasonable .com name. And so they fixed that by creating .biz. And so .biz was going to become the new .com, and businesses could be just happy living on .biz. And as, of course, as we know, that didn't happen, and .biz is sort of somewhat of a ghetto. But that's the way it worked out. .info is a very schizophrenic TLD. There are a lot of legitimate domains there, but there's also a lot of junk. And I don't know how often you run into .museum or .travel sites. The point is, most of this flew under the radar of the general public, and until .XXX came out in 2011 as a place for porn sites, none of this would have made like the general newspapers or the general media. XXX did. And then the web took a brief hiatus in 2012, and then wonderful things started happening. But the point is, for someone like me, this all still fit in my brain, okay? I could cope with this type of web. Now, we still play a little game in the research lab where you'll name a two-letter country code and try to stump the other members of the research team, right? So if I asked you, who is .ru, you'd know that's Russia, .fr, that's France. Those are easy ones. What if I asked you .cf? That's the Central African Republic. You probably didn't know that one. How about .hr? Anybody know that one? And it's not Hungary. That's what everybody guesses. And no Googling. That's cheating. It's Croatia or Hrvatia. So the HR is if you're really Slavic, you can bark that out of your throat. Anyway. So things get crazy in 2013, and they continue to be crazy today, where we have created over 1,000 new top-level domains. So the last time I checked this summer, we were almost at 1,400 valid top-level domains. I suspect we're a little past that now. The pace has slowed down a bit, thankfully, but we're still in a crazy place. And this got interesting to me because one day in the logs there were some interesting domains on .country. And so that was a TLD I hadn't seen before, and so I kind of poked around a bit, and I then got kind of curious because I couldn't find a single .country domain that was a legitimate real site. And so I started looking harder and harder, and I literally could not find a single .country domain that was like what I would call a real website. It was all spam, scam, and associated junk and malware. And so I wrote a blog post called The Undiscovered .country and called it out publicly and said, if you have a firewall or web gateway, you can safely block everything on .country and your users won't miss a single legitimate site. And it was so fun that I started doing this with more and more of the top-level domains. And so last December, we did a report where we listed not the dirty dozen, but the dirty 20. And .country, as of December last year, it's lost its top spot, by the way. A moment of silence for .country. But here's a sampling of the top-level domains and the percentage of URLs in our database with the shady category. So the methodology here is just dirt simple. We go into the database and we say, pull all of the .country things in our web database, and now what percentage of those have a category that's a negative category, which would be malware, botnet, spam, scam, pus, which is unwanted software, phishing, suspicious, I think that's those 7. And it's sad to look and see that there's this many top-level domains where literally almost every site on the domain is in one of those categories. Now, granted, the systems we use to trawl for evil sites skews our data towards the negative. For example, 27% roughly of the domains in 14 years of web research in our database, 27% of the .coms that are in there are shady, according to that, and that's not a live percentage. A lot of the bad, we find more bad stuff, so that's why we have, but still, 99.96%, and then the top, or the second 10 is not much better. There's .cf that I mentioned. So in the top 20, it's basically 95% or more of the sites that have been registered and show up in our logs and get flagged by us have a negative rating. And so, okay, it's fun to write blogs about these. I just did .stream, and literally every .stream site I could find, except for two, were basically being used by spammers. So as part of this, a year ago, we were calling out various evil TLDs, and we called out .zip, okay, as an evil TLD. In fact, it was number one because it had 100% of the things in our database were shady. And we got some pushback, okay, which is the great thing about the blogosphere. So we had some skeptics out there, you know who you are, that said, hey, there's only one real .zip domain. Okay, so Google owns .zip. They thought it would be really fun to create a whole web around the .zip space, and they haven't done it yet. So the only real actual .zip site, and we're not just talking like bad sites versus good sites, the only site was literally the, nick.zip or something. It was basically a placeholder page that Google had said, these are our cool new TLDs, and we're going to create lots of fun stuff with them someday. Stay tuned. And so how could Blue Coat come out and say, hey, 100% of the .zip sites in our database are shady if there aren't any? Okay? And this is where fun stuff happens. It's when unexpected things. So how can a TLD with no domains be 100% shady? And the answer is because now there's ambiguity in the world. Okay? So .zip used to mean one thing and one thing only. It's a file archive, right? It's a file, a compressed archive that has one or more files inside. All right? But now, thanks to Google and ICANN and IANA, something .zip might be a domain name. And how do you know if something is a domain name or a file archive? Okay, so to put this with a little more, well, we'd say, well, what's the context? If I'm looking at a directory listing of files and I see something .zip, it's a file. And if I see a domain .zip in my browser, then it's a domain, okay? Right? But computers aren't human, all right? Browser coders are. So there's this thing in all modern browsers called officially the Omnibox by the Googlers. I call it the address bar because I'm old, okay? And it's causing heartburn because Google is a search company, right? And so way back in the early days of Chrome, Google thought it was really cool if you could use the browser search bar to search for stuff, right? And so if you could get the browsers to feed search stuff to Google, right? So if it's a search term in your browser bar, it goes to Google or whatever other search engine you use. But if it's a URL, then it goes and looks it up on the web, okay? And then the browser tries to use context to distinguish those, all right? But things like .zip no longer have a single context, okay? So now you start to see the problem where it's not a bug, it's a feature. And so if you go out and into the Mozilla and Chrome bug databases, there are bugs that are stamped. We're not going to fix this. There isn't a way that we know to fix these, say the developers, and so they've thrown up their hands. Well, if you're a hacker, okay, you love ambiguity because ambiguity lets you mess with people. And the only thing that you might love more than ambiguity is bugs that are not really bugs, they're features. They can't or won't be fixed. So it's a security hole that never closes, okay? So now can you start, are the wheels turning yet? Our wheels were turning at this point, all right? So .zip got us thinking, and then one of the TLDs we profiled was .date. And this was designed to be like the premier top-level domain for dating services, all right? Why go to Match.com or Harmony.com when you could go to something.date, right? And ironically, when we did our profile of .date as a shady TLD, there was literally none of the spam and scam sites .date that were a dating type scam or spam. It's like, come on, bad guys, if you're going to have this wonderful TLD, you should take advantage of it. Sometimes the bad guys have no imagination. But okay, so if you're a developer and I were to show you this, camel case java.util.date, you would say, okay, that's a Java class library. right? It's Java, and it's the util library, and it's the .date class within that. But if I were to show you http://java.util.date all lowercase, now what is it? Oh, it's a domain. That's a URL. I can tell because it's got HTTP in front of it, right? But domains are not case significant, right? And so any form of that you put into a browser, what's going to happen? It's going to go out on the web. The browser has to say, .date. That's a valid TLD. This thing that they're looking up is a website, so I'm going to try to resolve it and go there, okay? So now if you wanted to do mischief around this ambiguity, you don't have to hack anything. All you needed, as of a year ago when this was still available, was $650, and you could own util.date. So my colleague, Daniel, wrote a little Python script, which you can get on GitHub at that address there, that takes really anything, any text file. In this case, he fed it the Java 8 namespace to look for members of the namespace that would be valid TLDs. And so there are Java, there's java.awt.graphics. Again, it's a capital G in Java land, but if someone were to register awt.graphics, now you own that as a web domain, including the java.subdomain if you are so inclined. So there's a bunch of collisions in Java, which you might want to say, ooh, we could maybe do some mischief with that. And so then you think, well, what about .NET? Yeah, system.drawing, it does dot stuff too. Python, datetime.date, yeah. Ruby, okay, colon. I'm looking at Ruby thinking there's got to be a way to do something with IPv6 at some point. The light bulb will kick on and I'll figure out the great way to mess with people in Ruby. So we then ran some, we being Daniel, because he did all the heavy lifting for this. I just cheered him on. So we went through a chunk of Apache Tomcat and the HTTP components, running this to see how often do you find collisions not in the Java namespace, but in a large code base's namespace. Because if you are cranking out a lot of Java code in your shop, you create your own classes, right? Well, how do you know if the classes you're creating are colliding with TLDs? Out of these two databases, it was a pretty consistent ratio. About 1 per 150 classes had a TLD collision that could potentially be used for mischief. So again, these aren't necessarily evil, but they put ambiguity in your world, and ambiguity can equal risk, and so you need to be smart about doing that. So after we did an early version of this talk at RSA, we kept an eye on the space, and we noticed that somebody in China, that's safe, right? No, nothing bad comes out of China, had already registered mssql.date. And someone in North Korea had registered naming.name. And so that we saw a URL for javax.naming.name showing up in the logs. I'm sure it was all just totally coincidental, not an actual attack happening. All right, so for the next step in our thinking, wearing our hacker hats, I have to take you on a quick little intermission to the wonderful land of IDNs, or internationalized domain names. And the basic idea behind IDNs is the web was originally built, or the whole internet was built around a US-centric ASCII version of computing. So you have letters A through Z, and the numbers, and some punctuation symbols, and some control characters, but there are no accented characters, there's no Chinese, there's no Arabic, there's none of that stuff, right? So the web grows up in .com land, and everybody in all these other countries and languages has to use ASCII characters for their domain names. And by golly, we believe in human rights. They shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to use their native character sets. And so this project called Unicode, which is really awesome if you're a word nerd like me, they basically figured out a way to, in 16 bits, to have all of the world's languages past and present in this one character set. And early on, as this started to be used on the web, people recognized that there's a potential problem here, all right? And if you look at these two things, they look identical, and they should look identical because they basically are identical, except that one of these is written in Russian and one of these is written in ASCII. Well, not all the letters are Russian. The W, the K, and the D are ASCII, but the other letters in one of those are actually Russian. And so if you were to cut and paste those into a browser, one of them would go to wikipedia.org and one would not resolve, and it would be trying to go to some xn-WKD blah, 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 blah.org. Okay? And so they recognized, ooh, this is going to be a problem. People are going to do phishing attacks based on internationalized domain names that visually look like the real site but aren't. Okay? So they set up some rules on governing the use of these names to try to prevent phishing attacks. And back in about 2010, there were a handful of blog posts to give shout outs to the other companies. Kaspersky and Trend and Symantec all produced blog posts warning people about this kind of phishing attack that they might run into. And so the basic idea is if we don't allow mixed character sets in one of these names, like that Wikipedia example, we can pretty well control the problem, was the thinking. But you know, the internet's a messy place, and there were already sites that were mixing letters, and they had to grandfather that in, and they can't enforce it. A standard is only a standard if people follow it, right? And so there are things out there that are free to disregard that or take shortcuts or whatnot. And so the bottom line is that a lot of people haven't messed around in this area, and it still is kind of mysterious and not well known. So as part of what we're going to show you later in the talk, we decided it'd be really useful to us if we're messing around with .date kinds of names like in Java, right? It might be really useful to register oracle.com. Well, the problem is there's already an oracle.com, right? And they're not going to give the name away free to a couple of researchers from a rival company that wants to mess with people. So we had to register our own version of oracle.com. And so we went to Cyrillic, the Russian code page, and we came up with this, and this is what the domain name would look like in a browser, which looks pretty good, if I do say so. Oglasle, but you wouldn't say that, you'd say Oracle, right? So one of those characters, the one in red, the L, is actually not found in normal Russian. And so that's a stretch. It is in the Cyrillic code space, but it's not normally used. And so we said, okay, our perfect name has one little flaw. Let's see if anybody catches it. And so Daniel went ahead to try to register the domain name, and he ran into the following conversation. He was actually getting an error not associated with the fact that we were trying to spoof oracle.com. The error was actually in the back-end system of the domain provider. And so he brought up a chat window, and Dmitry, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but Dmitry says, well, what's the domain name you're having trouble with? He says, well, it's this XN form, it's Russian. I want to just check out, I want the checkout to prompt, because when you registered the domain name, one of the questions was it would ask you, there's a box say, what is the language of this name if you're using international characters, so they would know which page to check it against to see if you were doing bad stuff. And Daniel wasn't getting the prompt, so he said, I need to get the prompt so I can register it. Oh, so you're attempting to register oracle.com, right? Oh, yes, that's the Punycode. So Punycode is, never mind. Punycode is the name of the XN -- form, and then the Unicode form would be this one. So actually, Daniel got it wrong. The Unicode form would be the oracle.com. The Punycode is the XN form. Anyway, so Dmitry says, oh, thank you. Please hold on. I am registering the domain manually for you. Oh, we've got some issues with ID and registration at the moment. I deeply apologize. I need to contract our upstream provider to have them investigate the issue. So 11 days later, we were finally rejected. No, you can't own that because the encoding type is Russian, but some of the characters, like one character, that L, was not Russian. And so they caught it, right? They stopped us from registering the evil lookalike oracle.com. So we almost got it. So in this case, the rules were followed and the system worked. It was rejected. But this was for a mainstream registrar in the US, not a shady registrar. There was a clearly illegal value there, and it still took 11 days to catch. As a final note, the 1 digit is a valid character, and Oracle.com with a 1 instead of the L is available, and that would be something you could register. So there's a lot of mischief you can do with IDNs. So there are some constraints in place, but it's really not that hard to figure out an attack using those. All right, so now we're ready to do our spear phishing attack. Okay, so we craft a believable-looking spear phishing email. So the subject here, we're worried about a new CVE in Java that may affect our code, right? So we're going to send this out to the developers. And so there's this Java sound.midi.midi-device.info class. And presumably, if you try to load a deliberately deformed MIDI file, you can break out of the JVM sandbox. And Chrome and Firefox have extensions that try to play MIDI. So you could have a MIDI sound file play when a web page loads. That sounds very 90s, doesn't it? Anyway, so here's this note that the Google researchers at Project Zero posted about this. Now, we did this in February, okay? So if I were redoing the spear phishing campaign, I would take the date out, but we wanted people to know that this was a thing, right? And we didn't make this up. That was the wonderful thing, is that the internet handed us a CVE in Java right when we needed to do this spear phishing test. And so we did that. So we put that in to make it believable. So there literally were Google researchers at their Project Zero that posted about this. And anyway, so here we go. So our team is going to do some research to see if we can release a quick patch to this, because this might affect our code, right? So I recommend you Google javax.sound.midi.midi-device.info. Okay, now you should know what's going to happen when the developer gets this email, right? Based on what I've told you so far. As a developer, if I get an email like this, what is my natural reaction going to be? Even if Daniel doesn't helpfully say, I recommend you Google this, right? Where is the documentation for everything in the world these days? It's on Google, right? In the old days as a developer, I would have to go to the compiler, like Microsoft Developer Network stack of CDs, and there would be information, all of the docs about the Visual C Studio and different libraries and stuff, and I'd have to dig through, and hopefully they've got it indexed well and I can find my article. No, I just go to Google, right? So we said, okay, this will be a spear phish that'll nail every developer out there, because there's no link, there is no attachment. It's a safe email, right? How can you do a spear phishing attack without a link or an attachment with just a text email, right? There's no way to hurt people with a text email, unless you give them something that they can't resist Googling, okay? So the fun thing is Daniel sent me this to look at, all right? So I knew when I got it, just like you guys know when you see this, this is clearly labeled. This is a spear phishing email, right? And so I knew that Daniel wanted me to Google this in the Omnibox, in the address bar. I knew he wanted me to paste it in there. And I thought, ha, 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 I'm going to see what happens if I actually do go and Google it. And so I flip over to Chrome, hit Control-T to open a new tab, because that's what I would do normally, and I see this. Okay, Chrome very helpfully comes up with the new tab, and look, I'm on Google. And I've got a little search box right down there at the bottom that says Search Google. And so I had intended to open the tab, go to google.com, actually type in google.com, and then when I knew I was on Google, then Google for the thing that Daniel was trying to trick me into Googling for. But I didn't do it because I hit this stage and my brain said, oh, I don't have to type in google.com to go to Google. Chrome has already taken me to Google in the lower part of the window, so I paste it in there. And of course, it doesn't matter which of those places you paste this Java class into. The browser says, okay, they want to search for something. It's either a search term or it's a web page. If you look at the little icon there, the top one, the default is to say, well, because this ends in .info, It's probably a web page they want to search for, but I'll also give them the option of doing a Google search. All right? But again, your brain is probably going to, I already think I'm on Google, I've pasted this in, I'm just going to hit enter. So unless you specifically clicked, no, I want to search on Google for this thing as a thing, not a web page, you will go to the website. And if you've already done this, this is the page you get to at javax.sound.midi.mididevice.info, and it looks like a Google search. And it's a real Google search because, again, this was a real CVE in February. And so we did a real Google search on the CVE, and we grabbed the top things, and we built a fake Google page. Incidentally, when our manager, who's a VP level guy, he's been in security for 20 years, he knew we were working on this project, and he said, send me the email, I want to check it out when you get it. So we sent him the email. He did the exact same thing, opened a new tab, pasted it in, got this page, picked up his phone and said, Daniel, it's not working. I'm not on the phishing site, I'm on Google. And Daniel said, no, you're not. He said, yes, I am. Come into my office. I'll show you. I'm on Google. And Daniel said, have you clicked anything? No. Click something. And you find out, no, I'm not on Google. I've been phished, all right? So originally, this was the part of the attack where we would need the fake oracle.com name because we were going to have all of the links. We were going to have the search results be real, the text, but the link part be the fake Cyrillic oracle.com. But as it turned out, we didn't need to do that because there was a fresh CVE that was really out there, and there were real Google results to all of those things, and we could just use JavaScript to intercept the click and then pop up this little dialogue that said, you've been phished, don't panic, no animals were harmed in the making of this experiment. And if you actually clicked on the OK button, you would then click through to the real article. We have since defanged the JavaScript, so if you go to this page now, you can click on any of those articles and we take you to the article. Nothing happens. But when we were gathering stats for this, we wanted to have this pop up so we could see how many people clicked the link, because we would get there's actually a separate URL that fires, and so in the logs for the web server, we could see that someone had indeed clicked the link, all right? So we sent that. We wanted to spearfish all of the engineers at our company, and our boss wouldn't let us. Wimpy, wimpy, wimpy. This is on YouTube, right? Hugh, you're a wimp, right? So they wouldn't let us do that. We weren't allowed to spearfish our own engineers. And so that's okay. We've got friends. We're sure we have at least one friend that works at a software company who will let us spearfish their employees. And we found one. We'll not name the company, but we said, hey, can we send this spearfishing email to all of your Java engineers? And he said, sure, this will be awesome. So we sent the CEO the spearfishing email, and then he forwarded it to all of his Java developers. Okay? Half of them took the bait, and 18 senior Java developers went to the site, and 17 of the 18 clicked the link. So we had a 50% response rate and a 97% success rate at convincing them the site was legal. And of course, if we were really doing an attack, we wouldn't even need to have them click anything. We could do a drive-by. But anyway, so yeah, we've now successfully moved from noticing something interesting about there being ambiguity in browser search bars with some of these new TLDs to coming up with a good attack scenario and then building it out and playing it back and finding out, yes, pretty much every developer that sees that email can't resist Googling for that, because that's safe, right? How can you get attacked by taking some text out of an email and Googling for it? Well, we just showed you, right? So, this is our recommendation for what you do to stop the sky from falling on your head. You circulate an email in your organization, and you're welcome to use the top 20 here, and say, if you see a URL that uses one of these TLDs, whether it's in email, whether it's in a text message, whether it's in a search engine result, don't click it. The odds are 20 to 1 that it's bad, okay? And you might also want to add a note about IDN abuse, our little oracle.com scenario. In a browser, if you mouse over the Unicode form of a URL. The browsers, because of that awareness that this could be a phishing attack avenue back in 2010, for 6 years, all of the browsers, if you mouse over a Unicode domain name in a URL, it'll show you a rollover bar that has the xn -- form. And so if you see the wikipedia.org and you mouse over it, it's xn -- garbage, it's like, wait, that's not really Wikipedia, right? If that's too technical for your users, leave that part out, right? But just don't click on the .country stuff. And then for your developers, I do another email to summarize how TLDs like this are ambiguous, in this case in the Java world, but whatever development environment they're in, whatever language and platform they're working on, there's probably something like this, because the dot syntax for class naming is so ubiquitous that it's something your developers need to be aware of, and so it's worth highlighting this kind of social engineering attack for them. Now, if you are interested in using our wonderful little spear phishing site to spearfish all of your developers, shoot me an email. We will happily re-enable the JavaScript pop-up to tell them they've been phished. Otherwise they would just go to the site and click through and they'd get the story from, it's all real, right? They wouldn't know they've been phished, so you have to have that pop-up there. But we will happily give you the stats from the web server on how many, when you send out your email at this point in time, how much visitation did we get? If you want to give us your IP range, fine, we'll give you better stats. Everybody from this IP, every click that came in from this IP range is somebody who took the bait. And of those people, how many of them did actually click on a link and would have seen the pop-up and knew they got phished? If you're interested in the TLD space, namestat.org and ntldstats.com are both very useful sites to kind of keep track. It's interesting if you look at, we got to be pretty good friends with the .xyz folks as a result of publicly shaming them in the blog. They actually contact us and say, hey, help us fix this, help us be better. And they've given us some interesting stats. So they try to track the amount of abuse on .xyz, and they have a variety of ways to measure, and by their measurements, they're doing pretty good. Most of the domains are not flagged by people as being bad, but that doesn't match with our view of reality. But anyway, there's a bunch of interesting stats there on the number of things. Both .xyz and .top, have registered more than 2 million domains in basically 2.5 years. So there's a ton of traffic on some of those things. But a lot of these domain names, I mentioned spam. There's a lot of .top stuff, .stream are very prevalent in my spam traps. If you have spam traps, look and see, they're probably in there too. .top is also currently being abused by the RIG exploit kit, where they're generating a lot of throwaway domains using .top as the TLD. And so again, there's lots of reasons to stay away from those. It's not all harmless, junky spam. There is actually some malware activity going on in there as well. So that is my talk. I'll be happy to take any questions. There's a hand. I say do that. Until they clean up the neighborhood, then there's no reason to. You are going to block a few innocent sites if you do that. .top inherently is a pretty cool TLD. There's lots of things that being .top would be kind of fun. But the reality is the way the economics work is. I'll pick on .xyz because I know them and because they are trying to fight this, and they have dropped from a position in our top 10, they've dropped out of the top 20 over the last year. They are getting some results in doing things, but they sell, I'm going from memory here, but they sell through domain registry services in over 50 countries. Well over 100 different registrars are reselling .top domains. So that's the ecosystem they have to police. Those individual registries are free to run promotions, right? So you may have a local registry that's going to blow out a bunch of .xyz domains for $1 each, or 50 cents each, or whatever, and the TLD register, or .xyz, has given them permission to do something like that. They suspect there will be a lot of abuse if that happens, and so then they try to monitor really closely what's the rate of reported abuse that came in from that promotion. No, that guy's just catering to bad guys, cut him off. But they'll try to stop that, but the economics tell you that if you're giving away domain names for next to nothing, that you're going to get a lot of abuse. If there are old timers in the room that remember .co.cc, show of hands, few. So this was .cc is, oh man, I used to know what the country code is. It's like Comoros, Comoros and what? Cocos, yeah, the Cocos Islands. There you go. So they got the great idea to create .co.cc and then to resell subdomains as domains on .co.cc. It's like you'd go to .co.jp or .co.uk, go to .co.cc, and there were literally millions of subdomains registered on .co.cc. At the time, you could batch register 10,000 domains for, it was like 5 cents each or 10 cents each. Who needs 10,000 domains? Spammers, okay? There really isn't anybody else that needs 10,000 domains. And if they're that cheap to register, then they're basically throwaway. And Google took the rather drastic step, I want to say about 2010, 2011, 2009, somewhere in there. Google dropped all .co.cc URLs from their search engine. Basically, it vanished from the internet. And there was some pushback, especially from the .co.cc guys, pointing out that there were a lot of legitimate mom-and-pop businesses that couldn't afford a fancy website, that were using that as a very economical way to have a website. And Google had unfairly discriminated against them, and Google told them to go away. We don't care. If you let your neighborhood get 99% junky and shady, then don't be surprised if nobody goes there anymore. And so that's my long-winded answer to that. Yeah, I don't have a problem with blocking. We've publicly called, if you go back and read the blog over the last year and a half, we've publicly called out at least a dozen TLDs and just said, we recommend everybody block everything on this. So we're willing to do that if that's what we see in the, and we don't do that unless we've gone in and supplemented, okay, our historical database view is 99.8% shady. What does the current traffic say? So we'll go back like a week in our logs, and these are worldwide logs from tens of thousands of large organizations, and say, what are the .stream, in this case, .stream sites that people are actually going to? And then of each of those, what's their rating? And if they're not rated yet, I'll go take a look and see. And again, there were 2 media type sites on .stream that I judged to be at least arguably legitimate. There was a porn site, there was a gambling site, and there was a handful of piracy sites. Those don't even count in the shady TLD ratings. You've got to have like the security related rating. But if the current traffic shows that essentially everything is bad, and the database says that historically almost everything we've ever seen from you has been bad, then we say, yeah, just block it until they clean up their act. Another question, yes? Namecheap sells domain names cheap. That's all you need to know about their business model. But yes, it's not too surprising if you start to see the same things popping up as you explore these different channels. So yes, there's a lot of spam on various TLDs, and a lot of it traces back to Namecheap. But there are others. They're not the only one at all. There's a lot of registries that, and they're not, and I want to be charitable and say they're not deliberately evil, but their business model is based on selling a lot of domains, because if you're selling a domain name for $1, that's part of the TLD model. Okay, I mentioned $186,000 to apply for a .tld, and if you in the wild woolly days of the in 2013 when they had the TLD explosion, there were a lot of cases where multiple folks had wanted the same TLD. And they'd all paid their $186,000 to apply, in which case that TLD went to a round of bidding. So it's a minimum of $186,000 to get in. If it's a cool TLD that you think is going to get a lot of traction, you may have to spend more than that to outbid the other people to get it. Then you are required to pay 25 cents per domain registered in your TLD back to, it's either ICANN or IANA, I get them mixed up, sorry. And you have to guarantee a minimum level of registrations. It's like 10,000 a year, okay? That's a lot of 25-cent registrations. Anyway, so now if you're a downstream registry and you're doing a blowout sale on .stream or .top or whatever it is this week names, and you're selling these for 50 cents or $1, okay, upstream, .top or .xyz or whoever has to pay 25 cents to ICANN. So how much profit margin is there for the registry that's making the sale and for the TLD registry that's authorized? There's not a lot of profit there, right? So the business model necessarily becomes, to make any money at all, I've got to sell a lot of domains. Well, again, who are the customers that need lots and lots of domains? It's the people that throw away websites by the hour because they're spamming and getting blacklisted, in a lot of cases. So it's all pretty natural economic supply and demand kind of thing. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, it's basically up, a two-letter is a country code, so IO is Indian Ocean, British Indian Ocean territories, and they've historically done a pretty good job. WS, Wales, there's a really good security company based out of Wales called Cymru, or Cymru, however you say that in Welsh, and they're tied in very closely with the National Registry, and so they try to keep that space policed. .ws is a fairly safe place to go. Japan is remarkably hardline on shenanigans, and you can get thrown in jail for spamming, and people do. Not very often because people get thrown in jail for spamming. And so there's not a lot of historical evil and shady behavior on .jp. .mil is the US military. You can imagine over time there are very few, if any, deliberately evil .mil sites that get set up. There are a few that get flagged for danger because they get compromised at some point, right? But that's about the only time a .mil address is going to make it into our database with a shady rating is when it's compromised. .gibraltar, .gi is a really safe country to have a website in. FYI, it's in the bottom 10 of the shadiest TLDs ever, along with .jp and .mil and a few others. So is Gibraltar inherently doing, this is .gi, by the way, is Gibraltar doing inherently something to really screen out applicants, or have the bad guys just not discovered .gi as a cool place to register domain names? Some of the country codes like .cf, .ml, Mali, .gq, which is Equatorial Guinea. There's a .gg, which is, oh heavens, I forgot .gg. Anyway, there's a handful of those country codes that have been bad. For NF is Norfolk Island. That's another bad one. TK, Turks. I think that's Turks and Caicos. I can't remember. The .tk has been shady for a long time, and so it's fairly common to be able to go out and Google for some of these, and you will find other companies besides us recommending just block everything there. There's a classic. I should have put this in my deck. There's a classic little meme generator that's got a shot of the Mos Eisley spaceport from Star Wars, the famous wretched hive of scum and villainy, and it lists like these 5 two-letter country code domain names that are TLDs that have been evil for so long that obviously nobody cares there, that they're infamous on the internet for poor quality neighborhood. So yeah, one of the blog posts I did, I contrasted .realtor with .accountant as to which one was more trustworthy, and .realtor wins in a landslide. To get a .realtor domain, you need to be a licensed realtor in either the US or Canada. There are still shenanigans that happen there because it's a redirect service, and the sites do get hacked. Realtors are not experts at web security. Their sites do get hacked, but barring a website compromise, no one can really easily set up an evil .realtor domain. .accountant, on the other hand, shows up heavily in spam, and if we do our little historical database check or a last 7 days, what's in the active traffic logs check, either way, it's a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And so .accountant there's nobody there. There are no bean counters at .accountant trying to keep their TLD safe. I don't even know who operates it, but whoever it is does not care. All right, that's the bottom line. If you've got a 99% historical shady ratio in our database, you don't care. It's as simple as that. I await to be proven wrong. We've had a few TLD registries, but really, like in almost 2 years of writing blog posts like this, I've only had 2 TLD registries reach out to me and ask for more information or justification or help or whatever. So, yeah, sad, but they don't care generally. Give us a question to end on a happy note with. All right, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of SAINTCON.